G'day guys and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to talk about some 4-16 scopes that I've personally used and what is the best bang for your buck. So in today's video, we're going to be comparing the Vortex Diamondback Tactical 4-16 by 44, the Athlon Talus 4-16 by 40, and the Discovery Optics LHD NV 4-16 by 44. Now, straight off the bat, these are not all in the same price category. However, we're going to see that we can probably get a little bit more bang for our buck by buying a cheaper optic than we can with a more expensive one. So I've previously done a full review on the Vortex Diamondback Tactical, so if you want to go and watch that, click the link. In short, it didn't really live up to the hype that people had given it. Now, Vortex optics have a very hardcore following. A lot of people hold them up there as one of the best optics manufacturers in the world, and I believe that's true if you're buying their top-end kit. Obviously, there's a lot of famous competition shooters who really do lean on Vortex, probably because they're sponsored, but they do use their top-end stuff, and their top-end stuff seems to be incredibly well made. When it gets to the lower-end stuff, though, it doesn't really fit in with, you know, the Marbo vibe of what they're trying to do.
It's Marbo, it's justice, it's law, it's the vibe, and no, that's it, it's the vibe.
So you've probably heard the old boys saying you've got to buy a scope that's twice the amount of money than the rifle cost you or whatever. That doesn't really apply in the 21st century. That's more of an older thing when optics were very hard to make and very hard to make well, so you had to pay good money to get a good optic. These days, you don't really have to pay that much money to get a decent optic. If you compare a low-end $300 to $400 optic today with something that was comparatively a few $1,000s back in the day, you would find that those optics were a bit shit. So if you take, for instance, a Weaver K series from the 1950s or 60s and you put it up against, you know, even a cheap Chinese scope of today, you would find the Chinese scope is a hell of a lot better. I won't go into full details of, you know, the Vortex thing, because if you really want to see that, you can go and click on that other review. But in short, the things I didn't like about it, the turrets were spongy. They didn't actually align with the hatch marks for, you know, the dialable lines that were on it. It wasn't locking turrets, so it was exposed, unlocked turrets. Now, that's, in my opinion, more of a target shooting thing. If you're marketing a sight as a, you know, tactical, meaning using a tactical environment and or that sort of thing, you probably don't actually want unlocked turrets. It was pretty bare basic. It didn't come with illumination. It's first focal plane, so that was a plus for it. The glass quality was really good, but that's about all I had really going for it. You compare that to these other two, which are Chinese optics, and we're going to see the good and the bad of Chinese optics. Not all Chinese optics manufacturers are the same. Some are good and some are bad. A lot of people say that they really like Athlon optics, but once again, I feel like they're buying the optics in the upper range of what they make. So they're buying the Athlons that cost them over $1,000. Now with the Athlon Talus, this one's, so it's second focal plane. Second focal plane scopes are a lot easier and cheaper to make, so a lot of the cheaper optics you're going to find will be second focal plane. Not to say that a second focal plane scope is always a cheap scope, and there are some applications where you would definitely want to prefer using a second focal plane over first focal plane. I feel like first focal plane sort of has this reputation of being the be-all and end-all, and everyone wants first focal plane, and then once they use it, they go, well, actually, this doesn't fit what I want to do with it. So that was another thing I didn't really like about the Vortex, was when it was zoomed all the way out of 4 power, hunting in the bush with it, the reticle was so fine and didn't have any markers leading into the center of the sight that it was very, very hard to find the center point. And therefore it cost me a lot of animals because I couldn't actually see where the bloody hell I was aiming. By the time I'd ended up on the animal and then having to zoom in, the animal had moved on. So had I been using a second focal plane scope in those instances, it would have been a hell of a lot easier to get those shots on. Now, some other first focal plane scopes do that better, so they can still have first focal plane and the benefits you get out of first focal plane, but on the lower power settings, you can still use it like a normal optic. So in dense terrain, it didn't really work too well for me. So that's an instance of when I would choose second focal plane over first focal plane. Didn't have illumination. The zoom ring was incredibly stiff, and I've had this with a few different Athlon optics in the, you know, sub $500 range, where their zoom rings are incredibly stiff, and it's so hard that you can't really do it with the rifle in your shoulder. You've really got to grind down on that to get it to turn, which You do want them stiff so it's not changing magnification without you doing it, but you don't want it so stiff that you really have to gronk down on it to actually get it to turn. The diopter ring was incredibly stiff as well, and that just goes back to the same thing. And the glass quality was actually pretty bad. So it was kind of like looking at an oil painting, or it's like you would put Vaseline on a lens.
Please be kind.
You look fantastic. Let me just adjust my lens here.
I just really didn't have a good time using that optic. And then the Discovery Optics 4-16, its downside is it's incredibly heavy. So let's go for the weights of these real quick. So the Vortex is 654 grams, the Athlon is 542 grams, and the Discovery Optics is 758 grams. So it's a hell of a lot heavier than the other two, a full 100 grams more than the Vortex, and Vortexes already do have a reputation for being heavy scopes. Depending on the application you're using that scope in, it is fairly heavy. So if this was for a rifle I wanted to walk around with, I probably wouldn't prefer that because of how it unbalances the rifle. It's not so much how much weight it's adding, but if you add that much weight above the balance point of a rifle, particularly with an optic, it's going to get top heavy and it tends to turn itself, and it's just not really a good shooting experience. The scope is, however, first focal plane, and the way the reticle is set up is I prefer that reticle setup to the Vortex, just in the way that on the lower power settings, it's still very usable and not so fine that you can't see what you're aiming at. So I've got two Discovery Optics scopes, and they both have incredibly nice turrets. Really loud audible click. They're not spongy, they really positively click into place. They always line up with their hatch marks. The style on this one is a locking turret where you pop it up, so you can pop it up, do your dial, pop it back down to lock. So it leads itself into, I would say, more that PRS style of shooting and or varmint hunting, where you might have your dope on your rifle or on a card, and you need a dial for a whatever meter shot. You can pop it up, turn it to that, and then you can lock it back down, and that way it's not going to move off what you've just put on, as opposed to a completely unlocked turret where you turn it and then you might bump it after the fact. You've got to change position, for how you want to shoot that, and then you've bumped it and you've knocked yourself off your aim off. The zoom ring is nice. It's stiff, but it's not too stiff. It's really in that Goldilocks area. Same with the diopter ring. I really liked both of those and how they function. It is illuminated, and funnily enough, out of all of these scopes, this is the cheapest. So at the time of filming, obviously prices do fluctuate, so what I tell you now may not be the case when you go to look for it. At the time of filming, the price for the Discovery Optics 4-16 is $415. The Athlon at the moment is about $480. And you can still buy Diamondback Tacticals for around the $780, $790 mark, depending on what seller you're going to go with. Obviously, some people mark up a little bit more than others. So shop around, you might be able to get yourself a bit of a better deal. So out of those three, Vortex definitely has the better reputation because their company has a better reputation. However, is that scope worth $300 to $400 more than a Chinese alternative? Now, when you compare that with the Athlon, yes, it is worth that extra money. What you get out of the Vortex Diamondback Tactical is a hell of a lot better than what you get out of the Athlon Talus. So the extra money you're paying is actually tangibly worth more to you in features and usability of the product. However, if you compare that with the Discovery Optics, you're paying nearly half the price and you're getting features that are on par or exceed the Vortex. Do you need to shun optics just purely based off the price point? I think those days are dead, and I think you really need to do your research into the optics before you buy them to figure out whether just because it says it's expensive, is it worth the money you're going to pay for it? A lot of these companies are banking off the fact that their really high-end stuff, their expensive equipment, is very, very good, and therefore the name of that carries their cheaper alternatives into the market, and they can sort of squeeze a little bit more money out of you as the consumer. To put it in perspective for you, I owned the Vortex Diamondback Tactical and I got rid of it. I owned the Athlon Talus and I got rid of it. I own a Discovery Optics and I still have it. I like what I like. Doesn't mean that you're going to like what I like. I'll leave you with those thoughts. Don't always go for the most expensive optic because it probably isn't the best on the market. You need to go out there and do your research, and hopefully I have shown you things to look at to pick what you need for your rifle scope. Anyway, I hope you got something out of that. I will see you next video, and hooroo.